Hello and welcome everybody. Today I want to introduce you to a timeless minion classic, the Stone Golem Necromancer. I've wanted to dedicate a build guide to this minion for a long time because it has a lot of things going for it and it's unjustly overlooked in my opinion. Its strengths are its permanent nature, high minion survivability, great AoE damage in form of the slam, and the defensive bonuses it provides to the player by taunting enemies and providing passive life regen. Its main limitations are the dated AI and the roll, which doesn't actually function as a gap closing ability like the leap slam from the Carrion Golem, but instead functions as a vector based attack that doesn't stop on impact. Since it has low damage, is multi-strikeable and puts your golems out of position, it lowers the DPS whenever it's used, which is a nuisance that you simply have to live with. In general, the Stone Golems are great at doing map-like content, including blighted maps, logbooks, delve, and simulacrum, but aren't as amazing bosses as something like Animate Weapon, for example. I've left an Atlas passive tree progression and a skill guide for the campaign in case you don't know how to level minion builds in the low-budget PoE. Just make sure to switch the Stone Golem to the main damage setup akin to the low budget once you start using 2 clay shapers, because that's when they start dealing the majority of the damage in your build. The ascendancy of choice is the Necromancer to boost minion damage and player survivability via Mistress of Sacrifice and Bone Offering. Due to the durability of the Stone Golems, we can also get away with using Plaguebringer, which reduces enemy damage, scales minion damage, and AoE, which improves clear speed while mapping. The maximum number of golems can be scaled with clay shapers in the low budget and Elementor from Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh in the medium budget onwards. Outside of the clay shapers, the low budget version utilizes cheap rares with life, resistances, and attributes. However, since it's a Stone Golem build, you have to get a pair of Primordial Harmonies for cooldown recovery, Primordial Might to make them aggressive, and an Anima Stone for +2 maximum number of golems, which isn't cheap, especially on League Start. For the Anoint on the Amulet, I usually recommend DK Ward in low budget builds because it's cheap and increases minion survivability, but since the Stone Golems are very tanky by nature, you can get away with Dark Arts to boost player survivability instead. For the flasks, you want to go with a Life Flask that removes bleeding, Roomies for armor and block chance, a Quicksilver Flask for movement speed, a Quartz Flask for phasing and increased armor from the suffix, and an Amethyst Flask with a proper suffix for chaos resistance and reduced shock effect. For the Spectres, you want to use the 2 Chieftains for charges on minions and a Demon Harpy to increase physical damage taken by enemies. For the AG, I recommend a set of cheap uniques like Relentless Fury for Culling Strike, Learcast for increased minion damage, Wake of Destruction for Shock Ground, Rare Hunter influenced Gloves with Intimidate on hit, Xandathis' Cassock to Chaos Cap the Guardian, which in combination with Broken Faith allows your Guardian to create Profane Ground on block, scaling your damage further. Quick note before we head over to the medium budget. While it is technically possible to lower the cooldown of the Golem Slam to the point where in theory they can use it on end, this is not advisable for a couple of reasons. First of all, fights can be chaotic, for example bosses teleporting away or your golems using the roll, which gives the slam time to cooldown. Secondly, your golems don't have to use the slam even if it's off cooldown, and most importantly, you have to get an unreasonably high amount of cooldown recovery from Primordial Harmonies, and have to limit the attack speed of your golems significantly. Instead, it's best to lower the slam cooldown to the point where your golems can use slam and the default attack consecutively, at least from the medium budget onwards. For the low budget version, you can still lower the cooldown to get perpetual slams, but that forces you to spec out of minion attack speed, and to get another jewel socket for an additional primordial harmony, which makes the build more expensive and overall feels worse in my experience. In the medium budget, we're switching to a pure energy shield base with a CI, so we no longer have to worry about chaos resistance, which frees up a bunch of modifiers on our items. To mitigate the impact of physical damage, we're speccing into Divine Shield, and to round out damage recovery, we're also using Graven's Secret. This helps us deal with elemental damage by transforming the power charges from the Chieftain into absorption charges, which allows you to recoup 12% of elemental damage as energy shield per absorption charge. In general, you want to use items with lots of energy shield, resistances, and attributes. Noteworthy mentions include the Skin of the Loyal, with a Corrupt Implicit for +3 socketed minion gems and increased global defenses. Aegis Aurora for ES recovery on block. A helmet with fractured +2 minion levels that is rolled with deafening essences of loathing for the explicit mana reservation efficiency. And replica Dragonfang's flight with +3 levels to stone golems. You also want to replace the remaining Clay Shaper with a +2 minion wand. The easiest way to make a decent one is by using a fractured base with minion damage and roll it with a combination of jagged, corroded, shuddering, and metallic fossils. For eye level 76 to 82 bases, you can replace the jagged with a bound fossil to improve the suffixes rolled that way. To make up for the loss of maximum number of golems from the Clay Shapers, you want to get the Forbidden Flame, Forbidden Flesh combo that allocates Elemancer, which also makes our golems immune to elemental damage, trivializing most boss fights in terms of minion survivability. You also want to start using large minion clusters with passive effect, minion attack speed, and energy shields to improve damage and player survivability. Other options include a medium cluster with Feasting Fiends, which makes your golems virtually immortal, and a Thread of Hope to access Golem Commander and potentially Arcane Will without wasting passive points. The flasks are pretty similar to the low budget. Main differences are a Bismuth flask instead of the Life Flask to overcap resistances, and a Silver Flask instead of an Amethyst flask for Onslaught. The fourth Spectre you can now access should be a second Demon Harpy for the debuff, and the AG now uses a shield that allows it to inflict Brittle on block, and Gravebind plus an Explodey chest, which in combination with the Anomalous Animate Guardian greatly increases clear speed. In the high budget, you want to get an additional minion cluster that optimally also has a fourth modifier, like resistances or attributes, and a mana reservation efficiency small cluster with increased passive effect, energy shield, and stats or resistances. This in combination with better implicits on the helmet and an Ashes of the Stars anointed with charisma allows you to fit the last aura, while haste. Keep in mind that the attack speed from the additional clusters and haste force you into Awakened Multi-Strike for the additional repetition, which is very expensive but necessary to keep out the consecutive slam default attack rotation. The gear in general is similar to the medium budget, but includes better rolled items, for example a Convoking Wand with rolled suffixes, a proper minion shield, and double energy shield jewelry. I've made crafting guides for those items that can be found in the crafting guide playlist in the description of this video and on my channel page. For the flasks, you want to get Bottled Faith instead of the Bismuth flask for regen and increased damage taken by enemies, and a specific elemental resistance flask that matches the main damage type of the boss, so a Sapphire for Maven, Shaper, Eldar, Cortex, Topaz for Ether, and Ruby for Exarch and Cyrus. The Spectres are pretty much unchanged. For the AG, you want to go with the Kingmaker For Culling Strike, Crit Multi, and Fortify. A double influenced helmet for increased fist damage taken and shocking conflux, so the Guardian can inflict shocks, which are then boosted by a well-rolled Storm Charger. And last but not least, Gravebind, and a double influenced chest for explosions and regen for the AG. I've made a short crafting guide video for a chest like that one, which can be found in the crafting guide playlist as well. For the tattoos, we're looking at +1 level of all strength skill gems for the attribute Notable, and either increased global defenses or increased non-curse aura effect for the small passives. I however doubt that TotA is going core, so this is probably only applicable in this league. Since this league is pretty much over, I imagine this will probably be more relevant next league. I don't expect a lot of changes going the way of minions or the stone golems specifically, although some of them would be desperately needed, like the roll stop on impact for example. Either way, I will of course update the build once we know all the changes as per usual, and I think that's pretty much it. If you have any questions or suggestions, you can leave them in the comments below. I try to get to them as soon as possible. I'll also be making a quick guide for the remaining November events, featuring a couple of builds and a mapping strategy for both. I will be live streaming the start of the events on Twitch, and you can find the link to my socials in the description of this video and on my channel page. Hope you liked it, and I'll see you in the next one.